This is not a tutorial. It is not a guide, and it is not an endorsement of counterfeiting, fraud, or financial crime. It is a cautionary animated story about ambition, deception, law enforcement, and one of the strangest legal outcomes in modern counterfeit history. One Canadian civilian allegedly printed up to $250 million in counterfeit U.S. currency, not over a lifetime, not with a government behind him, not with a warehouse full of employees, in roughly 5 months. And when the case finally ended, the part that shocked people most was not just the scale of the money. It was the sentence. About 45 days in custody, a fine of 1,500 Canadian dollars, and a deal that left investigators staring at a question they could never fully answer. Where did the missing 50 million go? Level 1. The quiet man by the river. In 2009, Frank was living in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, a city along the St. Lawrence River. He was in his early 40s, quiet, routine, and ordinary-looking in the way dangerous people sometimes are before anyone knows they are dangerous. To neighbors, he was not a financial criminal. He ran a small auto parts business. He kept a steady schedule. He had a longtime girlfriend who worked as a teacher. Their life looked normal from the outside. But his past was not perfectly clean. There had been stolen cars, small smuggling, the kind of criminal history that suggested he understood risk, but not the kind that would make anyone imagine him as the center of a $250 million counterfeit case. That is what makes the beginning of this story so strange. There was no cinematic gang, no underground laboratory full of specialists, no international syndicate handing him orders. Just one man staring at a $20 bill long enough to stop seeing money and start seeing a technical problem. Level 2. The paper problem. Most people look at a banknote and notice the number printed on it. Frank noticed the material. He understood something that separates amateur counterfeiters from serious ones. The hardest part is not simply making something that looks right from across a counter. The hard part is making it feel right in a cashier's hand. Ink can be copied badly or carefully. Images can be scanned, redrawn, or imitated. Serial numbers can be varied. But the paper is the first physical lie detector. Real currency paper has a texture that ordinary office paper does not have. It bends differently. It makes a different sound. It carries a different kind of stiffness and softness at the same time. A cashier may not understand why something feels wrong, but fingers are often faster than conscious suspicion. Frank realized that if the paper failed, everything failed. So before he thought about printing, distribution, or profit, he focused on the one barrier most counterfeiters never truly beat. He needed paper convincing enough to survive human touch. Level 3. The supplier. Frank began contacting specialized paper manufacturers overseas. Not because he could buy real currency paper. He could not. Instead, he looked for companies that already produced high-end security paper for certificates, legal documents, awards, and financial-looking materials. He built a cover story. He presented himself as someone working in legitimate printing and specialty documents. He spoke the language of business, samples, orders, specifications, and custom production. For months, he communicated with suppliers, reviewed paper samples, adjusted requirements, and pushed for a product that would look innocent inside a commercial invoice but dangerous in the wrong hands. Eventually, he secured a relationship with a Swiss paper supplier. Then came the requests that moved the project from suspicious to extraordinary. He wanted paper with security-style features embedded into it. He wanted a watermark-like image that, to a factory worker, could look like decoration, but to investigators later would look like intent. He even paid for custom tooling so the paper could be made closer to what he imagined. When the first samples arrived, he held them up to the light. The effect worked. The paper did not yet make him rich, but it changed the crime from fantasy into possibility. Level 4. The farm. Once the paper problem was solved, Frank moved the project away from the visible part of his life. A farm outside the city became the quiet center of the operation. From the road, it looked ordinary. Inside, it became a production site. He brought in printing equipment. He tested inks and alignment. He rejected imperfect sheets. He studied every mistake with the patience of a technician and the pressure of a man building something illegal at industrial scale. He chose the $20 denomination for a reason. It was common. It moved quickly. It appeared in convenience stores, gas stations, restaurants, and small purchases. Large bills invite suspicion. Small bills disappear into routine. That was the psychology of the plan. The perfect counterfeit is not the one that amazes experts under a microscope. It is the one nobody thinks to check. As the presses ran, the numbers became unreal. Bundles became boxes. Boxes became stacks. Stacks became an amount of fake currency so large that even investigators later struggled to speak about it like something one person could have produced. Up to $250 million. And for a while, nobody outside the network knew. Level 5, the wholesale network. Printing was only half the danger. The real risk was circulation. Most counterfeiters are caught because they get greedy at the wrong moment. They spend the notes themselves. They trust the wrong person. They stand too close to the point of sale. Frank tried to avoid that. He did not want to be the man using fake 20s at a store counter. He wanted to be the wholesaler behind the wholesalers. So he sold the counterfeit bills at a discount to intermediaries, who then passed them further down the chain. The farther the bills traveled, the less anyone knew about the source. No buyer saw the whole inventory. No middleman knew the full operation. No street-level passer understood where the notes were born. On paper, that structure looked smart. In reality, it created a new weakness. Every person added to the chain was another possible informant. Every deal created another memory. Every layer of protection also became another layer that police could peel back. The operation was not exposed by the printing press. It was exposed by people. Level 6, the undercover buyer. The weak point came through a middleman named Eric. Eric had a reputation in another corner of the criminal world. He dealt in stolen heavy equipment and construction machinery, and for a long time, one of his trusted customers was not who he seemed to be. That customer was an undercover officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. By the time counterfeit bills entered the conversation, trust had already been built. So when Eric heard about high-quality counterfeit 20s moving through the underworld, he mentioned them to a man he believed was a reliable buyer. The undercover officer showed interest. A first small transaction was arranged. The notes were examined. The quality was serious enough to trigger alarm. A second transaction followed. From there, investigators began climbing the chain. They did not yet see the whole machine, but they had found a thread. And in cases like this, one thread is enough. Level 7, the raid. On May 23, 2012, before sunrise, police arrived. 12 RCMP officers, supported by 2 agents from the United States Secret Service, came to Frank's residence. His girlfriend woke up first. She knew pieces of his past, but she did not know the scale of the secret sitting behind their ordinary life. Both of them were handcuffed. The search began. Investigators found counterfeit currency, printing materials, and evidence that confirmed the case was not small. To law enforcement, it looked like a major success. But Frank had expected the possibility of a raid. The material inside the residence was not the whole story. It was not the full inventory. It was not the heart of the operation. The largest stockpile had already been moved. Inside the interrogation room, Frank calculated the situation with the coldness that had defined the entire crime. If he were prosecuted only in Canada, the sentence might be painful but survivable. But then the American agents entered the picture. That changed everything. Because counterfeit U.S. currency is not merely a Canadian case. It touches the financial system of the United States. And the Americans wanted him. If extradited, he could face decades in U.S. federal prison. Suddenly, the crime was no longer a business risk. It was a lifetime risk. Level 8, the bargain. Frank appeared trapped. But he still had one thing investigators wanted more than his confession. The money. Not the money he had earned. The counterfeit inventory that had not yet entered circulation. By late 2013, prosecutors were preparing a sentence that would have put him away for years. His lawyer urged him to consider it. Frank refused. Then, outside court, he revealed the card he had been holding back. He claimed he still controlled approximately $200 million in counterfeit bills, along with the equipment needed to make more. For investigators, this transformed the case. Punishing Frank mattered. But preventing $200 million in high-quality counterfeit currency from spreading through the economy mattered more. That was the leverage. A deal was reached. He would surrender the remaining counterfeit inventory and equipment. In return, prosecutors accepted the time he had already served as the full sentence. The extradition threat was withdrawn. His girlfriend's property was protected from seizure. American agents were reportedly furious, but the agreement belonged to the Canadian legal process. On January 31, 2014, Frank led investigators to a parking lot. A truck was opened. Inside were stacks and stacks of counterfeit bills. From floor to ceiling, the evidence sat there like a physical version of disbelief. Roughly $200 million. But when investigators traced the paper orders and calculated the likely total production, they reached a larger number. Up to $250 million. That meant approximately $50 million remained unaccounted for. Maybe it had already moved through the network. Maybe it had been hidden. Maybe it was destroyed. Maybe someone still knew where it was. But the agreement was already signed. The leverage had worked. And the case ended with a sentence that sounded impossible next to the scale of the crime. About 45 days. A 1,500 Canadian dollar fine. And one of the most unusual counterfeit outcomes in modern history. Final reflection. The strange thing about this story is that Frank's most powerful invention was not the counterfeit bill. It was the bargaining position. He created a problem so large that solving the problem became more important than maximizing his punishment. That does not make him a genius worth admiring. It makes the story more disturbing. Because most people imagine justice as a straight line. Crime, arrest, conviction, punishment. But real systems are often more complicated. Evidence has limits. Jurisdiction matters. Public safety can outweigh revenge. A criminal can sometimes hold the very thing the government needs most. Frank did not escape because the crime was small. He escaped a long sentence because the crime was too large to ignore. He had turned counterfeit money into a hostage. And by surrendering most of it, he bought back the one thing no amount of fake currency was supposed to purchase. His freedom. That is the real lesson. Not how to print money. Not how to beat the law. Not how to admire a criminal. The lesson is that systems built to protect trust can be damaged by one person with enough patience, enough deception, and enough willingness to turn an ordinary piece of paper into a weapon against reality. Because money only works when people believe it works. And for a few months in Quebec, one man quietly manufactured doubt by the box.